Namaste, welcome, Hari Om, and Shalom Alaikum, Shalom to all the friends and people out there. Welcome, I am Mathura Das. I think this is my 19th live share in this series, the Between Worlds series, and it's being broadcast from southwest England. And thanks, Bruce. It's good to know that people are out there and it's working. Sometimes we do have technical difficulties. That's the nature of the world. But it's wonderful to be here again. And in my shares, for those who haven't been following, I just do an introduction of chanting a few Oms, then some prayers to my gurus, then I'll do a chant or song, and then I have my long talk, and it's a long talk that's been going on, and it's arrived at quite a crucial time in the story of the Krishna movement that I became part of in 1973 when I was just about 17 years old, and that's how I got the name Mathura Das, which is really about what a lot of the story has been about. Now I'm involved in the story of the Krishna movement, and Prabhupada, Bhaktivedanta Swami, has passed in the story, so we're carrying on from that time. And so there you go. This is the story, but I'm going to get to that in a minute. First we're going to chant some Oms. Jean is there, Bruce is there, I'm quite sure there's a few others joining, and if they're not going to be here live, they'll be here a bit later or another time. That's the great thing about technology, isn't it? Anyway, it's been wonderful, and it gives me some kind of validation for my existence, coming out here and being allowed to be a chronicler of times, and hoping that this is a valuable kind of service to my teachers, to the lineage, to people in general, and to posterity and future generations, and informing people friends and people who may not know about all these nitty-gritty details that I'm going into now, but they might find them interesting and might make them understand people like me, or why is the Krishna movement that way, and what's the history. Okay, now it's time to chant some Oms. A, U, Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jananyana Salakaya Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swabadandikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Juta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sahagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahaguna Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitanscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Shri Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Bhaja Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta-vrinda Vanchakalpa Tarubhishcha Kripa Sindhu Bhayevyacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paskyasate Satarine Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hi again to anybody who's just tuning in. Going to do a song now. I think I'm in a Shiva mood today. I saw Jean likes Shiva, so that's the clue from the gods. I'm going to sing for Shiva and today, because the processes that I'm talking about are heavily, there's a lot of transformation going on. I know there is at the world at the moment, but part of my story as well. So, okay, here we go. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole, Namah Shivaya. Call and response. I mean, you can do whatever you like, but that's how it normally goes. Oh, there was an interesting sound. I could hear it outside my window. It was almost in tune with my tempura. Okay. Oh wow, there's a light coming from over there. 1 second. Anyway, it's not the end of the world. There's a light shining off my fridge onto my guitar. Okay. Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Gangadarai Shiva Gangadarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Gangadarai Shiva Gangadarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Someshwarai Shiva Someshwarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Someshwarai Shiva Someshwarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Jatadarai Shiva Jatadarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Jatadarai Shiva Jatadarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Umeshwarai Shiva Umeshwarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Umeshwarai Shiva Umeshwarai Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Om Namah Shivaya Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya. Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya. Vishveshwarai Shiva Vishveshwarai, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Vishveshwarai Shiva Vishveshwarai, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya. Someshwarai Shiva Someshwarai, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Someshwarai Shiva Someshwarai, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya. Gangadarai Shiva Gangadarai, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Gangadarai Shiva Gangadarai, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Bole Namah Shivaya, Hara Hara Mahadev. Shankar Bhagavan Bholenath. Okay. I think I might do quickly the so much trouble in the world thing, because it is all going around in the world, isn't it? But not that we have to dwell on all of that. It's kind of coming up with the silver linings and the positive state of mind to keep equilibrium and to stay in the love vibration as much as we can, despite everything that's going on and the stories that we're all going through. So here we go. Turned into Sri Ram Jai Ram, so please join in. Okay, so you've got to do it this way, this angle. this morning. The sun is on the rise once again. The way things are going, anything can happen, because they're sailing on their ego trip. Blast off on their spaceship, miles from reality. No care for you, no care for me. So much trouble in the world. There is so much trouble in the world. All you gotta do is give a little, give a little, give a little bit one more time, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Shri Ram, Jai Ram, Jai Jai Ram. 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 Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Shri Ram, Jai 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 Ram, Jai Jai. Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Shri Ram, Jai 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 Ram, Jai. Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram. Shri Ram, Jai Jai Ram. All you gotta do is give a little, give a little, give a little bit one more time, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Shri Ram. Bolo Shri Ramachandra Bhagavan ki jai. Bless Bob Marley. God, I bet he would have a lot to say now. Welcome everybody, people who've just been tuning in. Thanks for coming and joining me on my live share and giving me an opportunity to share this kind of far out story that I have been sharing with you, which is not just my own personal story, it's the story of a generation. Then it becomes the story of an organization, a movement, the Krishna movement that was started at a specific time by somebody very specific, Bhaktivedanta Swami, who arrived in America in 1965. Me, as a teenager, got involved in 1973. We've now progressed in the story to this very monumental time. Bhaktivedanta Swami has passed away on the 14th of November in Vrindavana at the age of 82, after actually spent in within 12 years from the time of kind of starting the Krishna movement in 1976 to this time. If you look at what he did, it's just like phenomenal. And there's so many much literature and videos and stories, and I've already given hints, and I will keep referring back to his monumental efforts at work and influence on the lives of thousands and millions of people, and especially into the future generations as well, because it keeps growing. At this time, when Bhaktivedanta Swami passed, at that time, on the 14th of November 1977, he had actually only initiated about 5,000 disciples. Now we're going into the next part of the story, and I've just, if anybody wants to know what happened next, there was a big festival in Mayapur, the birthplace of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and there the leaders of ISKCON decided to interpret certain instructions that were given by Bhaktivedanta Swami in a very, very totalitarian way, really, which was going to kind of really take the Krishna movement in a very, very specific direction for the next few years and up and even into now. So this was big. Bhaktivedanta Swami was gone from the physical plane now, and now his disciples, the oldest of which had only been his disciples since 1966, and mostly who had managerial positions, or they were kind of senior sannyasis in the movement. Of those 11, two was still married. That was Bhagavan and Jayatirtha. They were still grihastas. All the rest were sannyasis at that time. And I describe what happened that day after they were made gurus. I described some stories. I described a meeting that was held where the library party that I'd been part of was taken over after Gargamuni Swami, who'd set it up, had left after Prabhupada's departure, just kind of disappeared, and Tamala Krishna had taken Goswami had taken over the management, not by the choice of the other members of the library party, in fact against our choices, and it led to the decimation of the library party. Really, a few people stayed, some people went off here, some people went off there. I was planning to go back to Amsterdam, but before that was going to happen, we were all in Mayapur. The second part of the festival was going to be in Vrindavan, and already this vibe that had been set up and this precedent at this festival was instantly causing waves, but nobody really kind of really realized what was actually going to happen. But when we got to Vrindavan, in Vrindavan, Pradyumna, who was kind of based there, he went back after the festival there, and there was Yashodanandan and Guru Kripa, and Yashodananda and Guru Kripa had been a big fundraiser in the whole story of everything, and especially in Vrindavan to set up all the centre, and they were really against what was going on, and this kind of whole move by these 11 people to suddenly become these absolute gurus. But they haven't really quite established that quite yet, but they were pushing at this story very rapidly. And in Vrindavan, I was really shocked to see that, because what had happened was they were starting to kind of like object to exactly what this way that these people had decided to take on the mantle of guruhood. They were the first people, and they were quite strong, and it was immediately met in Vrindavan with a public lecture by Hridayananda Goswami. And up until then, I'd really not known much about him except read his lectures and talks, and he was considered one of the intellectuals in the Krishna movement. But then he went on the Vyasasan and gave one of these talks again that was nothing to do with the verse from the Bhagavatam, but it was a political speech trying to actually kind of set the new agenda of what was going to happen. And it was one of these, all those people who kind of criticize this, they're this and they're that, and this is the way forward. This is the way that Prabhupada wanted us to be. And it was already creating a divide and rule mentality, and I really didn't like this talk at all. I don't think many others did as well, but a lot of people did. And so that was a kind of a sign of things to come. I can't really remember that much about the festival, except that because I was in this mood of going back now to Amsterdam. And so that's what we did. We went back to Amsterdam, and it was all. I've been away for 6 months, and the mood in the temple had quite changed. Lots of new devotees had come, and they they could have kind of taken many of them, taken initiation from Prabhupada, but they had held up and not given these initiations in the last months. They could have easily just had initiations, but they didn't. Because Prabhupada said you can have these initiations for, you don't have to ask me. And those disciples would have been disciples of Prabhupada. But no, there was a whole kind of backlog of lots of young devotees. And so many of them who I'd never seen, because many had joined in the period I'd been away, and one of them I become very good friends with years later, Prana Vallabha, who was same age as me, but just happened to miss initiation from Prabhupada. He'd been in France and then had come to Amsterdam while I'd been away, and you know, part of Vimuktasanga had kind of tempted me back to Amsterdam, saying, "Look, I'll make sure you're okay. You've got somewhere." Because I said it's going to be, this whatever's going to happen now, and I'm used to my freedom. I wonder if there's somewhere where we can have a little bit more space, somewhere. And he assured me that there was. Um, and so that was the first thing. And there was this little room. Um, That was it. One of the what they decided to do was we wanted to make some kind of facilities for a kind of for Bhagavan, because he was coming quite shortly, and his first visit as a guru, and we didn't really know what to expect. There was no kind of big pressures put on us, except we thought, okay, what we'll do is we'll just there was this at the top of the temple. There was a room where mostly the brahmacharinis had been staying, but now there had been a new property bought on another gracht called the Kaiser's Gracht, and all the women moved over to there. And I'd never seen this area before, but we were going to kind of turn this into a new room for Bhagavan and his secretaries and things to stay in. And and so we went to work. A few of us, we did it together. We painted the room. We stripped it down, and I chose all the kind of the fabrics. They were quite simple but tasteful, and we got a kind of seat thing for him to sit on in his room, a desk, some lighting. I had a couple of my Indian hangings still that I got, like this one on the wall that was put over a table. And I mean, up until now, nobody who would in ISKCON had these kinds of facilities. Prabhupada, they had special rooms if they had space in their temples that for Prabhupada, but nobody else really had a special space at this time. Even sannyasis, they may if they had, they would have just gone in the library, not the library, the offices, and just gone with a sleeping bag and sleep there kind of separately. It was also according to access to showers and things like that. So we decorated this room, and Bhagavan came, and he was still married, and he was quite charming actually. He was on this first visit, and he came to his rooms. He was very impressed that what we'd done, because I think it was the first place, and he'd kind of gone on his tour around his zone, because he was a GBC and had these different centres. There was centre was in Paris, then there was the chateau in France, New Mayapur, there was Spain, and there was a couple of centres in Italy, and I think there was a few other things, but I can't remember. I think that those Greece, yes, in Greece as well. And so there were these centres that he was the GPC of. And how that related to being a guru, we weren't quite sure how that was all going to work, but we would shortly find out, because things were going to move at a very astonishingly rapid rate in front of our very eyes. And So it was at the beginning. It was quite nice. He came and spent a few days there, and he was so impressed with kind of what we'd done. He kind of like phoned up his other people and said, "Hey, what they've done in Amsterdam is really good. Tell all the other people they should do something like this for when I come." He was already setting up his ideas about how he was going to do things. And it was for him, it was a kind of a bonding session with him and most of the new disciples in the temple. Had we built a Vyasasan for him at this time? I'm not even sure if we had. Maybe if we, I'm not sure what we'd done. There was because we had the Vyasasan with Prabhupada's Murti on it. We were one of the first centres in Europe that had one. I'm not quite sure if we even had the Vyasasan on this first visit. Maybe that came later, or maybe we already had it. But Bhagavan was dressed in white. He was a grihastha. He had a couple of children. He was married to Krishna Bhamani. He was a kind of a generally considered bit of a great role model for grihastas. So um, just after Bhagavan came, the news he was just spent a few days there and then went off. And there was a car that was there that we had, which was this kind of Mercedes Benz old, that he could use if he needed to travel around. Um, he went away and then he gave a phone call. And what had happened is that Malati, um, who has been mentioned before, um, she's now a GBC in ISKCON, and she was one of the very early disciples. For a little bit, she went on a bit of an AWOL story, like quite a few older devotees when the new kind of regime came in. And she had been a part of the Dutch Yatra, and there was some money apparently that she had that had was for some kind of things that she had been doing shopping for Bhagavan's own. And so on that pretext, Bhagavan sent me and Vimuktasanga on a short little visit to India right after this, and it was quite hot. It was kind of April, May, quite really, really quite hot, late April, May, and we went off to India on this kind of mission, and it was unusual, quite unusual, and it was just me and Vimuktasanga. And what happened was, I don't go into too many details, but it was interesting what happened because. He went met Giribharad Hari, the brother of Smara Hari, who accompanied him on his journey to go up and find contact Malati, who Smara Hari knew where she was. She was in Rishikesh. Smara Hari had been in India for years, and he was the person who knew everything that was going on everywhere somehow or other. And so he went up there. Now, in my research that I'd been doing previously, I mentioned with the artists that were primarily based in Nathadwar, and I discovered that one of the main artists had moved from Nathadwar to Udaipur, and everybody I hadn't actually met him yet. I'd only met Narottam Narayan on that last visit, and a couple of other artists in Nathadwar. But he was considered at that time to be really some of his posters that he'd done in the 50s and 60s, I wasn't that impressed with. But I was going to be very impressed very shortly because I was going off to meet him in Udaipur by myself. And while I was on the train to Udaipur, going from Delhi to Udaipur, I suddenly realized that actually this was the first time, really, apart from just jumping on the plane from London to India, where I'd actually was traveling by myself. And it was quite a revelation. All this time always with somebody traveling and referring to somebody, whatever, wherever you're traveling. Suddenly it was just me, and it was great. I really loved it. I could just talk to people as I felt. Didn't have to think about anybody else. I was quite happy being me, and then I got to Udaipur and I found out a kind of little guest house to check in. That was very very nice, and I got a couple of extra. Another told this gentleman in the hotel what I was there to do, and he says, "Oh, I've got some other addresses of people that you should see." So I went off and I went to meet BG Sharma, who lived in 48 Ashok Nagar, I remember now, at that time. And he had actually left Nathadwar, gone to Bombay, studied art at the JJ School of Art, like Indra Sharma, and developed a kind of a more kind of modern style, but based on his training in the Nathadwar style. And none of the new stuff that he'd been doing for the last 20 or 30 years he'd been printing, so nobody really knew what he was doing at that moment. And I was greeted very warmly, and apparently he was a life member. Haridas, Indian devotee Bengali from Bombay, had made him a life member and visited him in his office in Bombay, where they printed posters. But I was the first person to show real interest in him as an artist. I was obsessed. That was my fascination with art. Also, just before going on this journey, while I'd been in Vrindavan with Vimukti, I'd gone to the very famous Imli Tala, which is a special Kalpavriksha tree in Vrindavan, sacred place. Unfortunately, it's not in good shape these days, but in that time it was still there, and it was where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had sat under that tree, contemplating Radha, Krishna, and turning blue. And it's a very, very special place, that Imli Tala. And while I was there, I hugged the tree, and I asked to be Krishna to be. I said, engage me in your service to do with art and beauty and music, because that's what inspires me. And that was basically, and then right after this, I got to meet BG Sharma. I'd already met Narottam Narayan, I explained, but I didn't really explain that after meeting him and going back to Ahmedabad before we crossed over to India, to Mayapur, I'd been actually kind of almost engulfed in visions on the bus journey home, just being there and seeing these artists and seeing what they did and the whole world. It triggered something in me, and I went into this very, what I just call Krishna conscious mode, where I was just couldn't stop but see Krishna. My mind was flooded with various things and designs, and it was very inspiring for me. And so here I was, and I came to Mr. B.G. Sharma's house, this big house, and there was his son Mukesh, and it was very big. They were very pleased to see me, and it was very hot weather. And B.G. Sharma was one of these Paka Brahmins who used to change his cloth 3 times a day, and have it. They had their own farm, their own ghee, their own cows. Anyway, when I saw some of the work and the art that he'd been doing in the last few years, blew my mind. It was huge, and traditional and full of details. And then he also had slides of all these other things that he'd been doing, mogul pictures, this things, and he'd been sending some to a multi-millionaire in Dubai. And so lots of the stuff was not even there. But I was mind blown, and we made a really good connection, and so that was really brilliant. That would carry on. I would go there many, many times and become quite close to BG Sharma, in terms of the Western devotees becoming close and staying at his house in Nathadwar, and that would be great. And also I went to see another very good artist called Ganesham Sharma, whose son is Lalit Sharma, and his the son is called Kapil Sharma, and they're all wonderful artists. But Ganesham was a very traditional miniature artist, nowhere near as prolific as BG Sharma. So I had a great time in Udaipur, rushed back to Vrindavan, or I think maybe I met Vimukti in Delhi, I can't remember, but no, maybe in Vrindavan. And then we went on this other mission to Puri. And when we went there, we discovered, because someone had mentioned that there was this a kind of coral going really cheap there as a kind of business way of making funds for the temple. So we ended up going to Puri, and it's a bit of an involved story that I'm not going to go into, but I got the prasad again for the second time. It was wonderful having the Puri prasad and enjoying, but it was very hot at that time. And we found a connection, a lovely chap called Vasudev Mahapatra. He connected us, and we got some of this. We weren't sure why it was so cheap, and it looked really good, and it could be fake, but we weren't sure. Anyway, we got a whole bunch of that stuff. It was put in a trunk, and then we went on a train. I think maybe we flew. We flew to Delhi. The flight, I remember the flight coming from on one of these small little planes that when it left from Calcutta to Bhubaneswar was fantastic. You could see. I think we flew over Konarak, and you could see the Konarak Sun Temple and the sea, and it was wonderful. That was really exciting. And then we came back to Amsterdam, And we got rid of this coral, and the people who we sold it to at some trade show, we told them we're not sure if it's real or not. And anyway, they got it checked and they said it's not real, but we're going to flog it anyway. So they thought that they were onto a kind of nice little earner there. I don't think that we didn't repeat it, but a few other devotees tried to do it when the word got round about this coral being there. Anyway, that wasn't. Anyway, that was just a little side thing. Little. I just looked at my notes. There's so many things happened at this time, and I'll try not to go down too many side avenues. And so, as soon as we got back, we were just getting settled again, and then Bhagavan called Vimuktasanga off to go with him and Tamala Krishna to India because he had decided he was going to take sannyas from Tamala Krishna, and he wanted Vimuktasanga to go on this journey. And I'm sure there's some other people that would have been in Vrindavan at this time because it was quite a big thing, Tamal Krishna giving sannyas to Bhagavan, who was one of the most famous married men. And everyone was wondering, why is Bhagavan taking sannyas? It's a good question, isn't it, really? I do have a bit of an answer to that, a roundabout answer. I might as well say it now I'm talking about it. Quite a while later, I went to meet an astrologer that all the devotees had been going to because he'd been contacted just before the time of Prabhupada. His name was, well, the father's name was Gopesh Kumar Oja, and his son was called Ashutosh Oja. And they had been the court guru astrologers to the Maharaj of Alwar, and they lived in Daryaganj. And I went quite a few times, became quite close with them. And then I asked him about specifically about this time because he was mentioned that Bhagavan had come at this time. And things had happened much after this, and he said that Bhagavan had come to ask him if there was sannyas in his indicated in his chart, and the actual kind of what sannyas means, somebody who's detached and renounced. He said it wasn't really there, but then Bhagavan wanted to know if he had kind of took it, would it be advantageous in his kind of career, in a sense? And Oja told me, he said it might help for a bit, but not forever. It might help you temporarily in this story. So. As far as I know, that's a true story. I don't know why Ashutosh Oja would have told me something different. So something was going on in the minds of Bhagavan that was being stoked by somebody. And because knowing him from just before and also knowing Bhagavan over knowing him, he was quite a reasonable chap, much more reasonable and quite easy to get on with, at least from my point of view. And he was. It's funny how kind of the poles of kind of political, like at one time Hansaduta was considered very right wing, and then he became quite radical. And Bhagavan at one time was considered quite kind of reasonably libertine compared to Hansaduta, and then later became quite conservative and totalitarian. So it's amazing how people's personalities can change and get affected in this scenario with hierarchies and power. Uh, because this is what has happened to the leaders now. They're suddenly in this position where this big vacuum that Prabhupada has left, they're trying to fill it up in the way that they think it should be filled up. And we're kind of experiencing this and how it's going on. So shortly after Bhagavan took sannyas, he came back to Europe and he came to Amsterdam. Okay. Now, when he arrived in Amsterdam after this trip, it was quite phenomenal, the transformation in his persona. Because persona comes from it's a Greek word, which it's like because in the theatre they use masks in the theatre, and persona is a part of your personality. It's what you project to the world, and Bhagavan's persona has really changed with coming in when he arrived at the temple. Now, all of his new disciples, potential new disciples, were really kind of all psyched up because he was going to become their guru, even though the big guru story hadn't been laid out in the first visit. But now, as he came in, dressed in immaculate silk saffron, he had the whole kind of swagger and the look and the walk and the tilted head and these kind of Napoleonic kind of emperor kind of royal gestures. And I was watching all this straight away. I noticed it immediately, and a kind of poise. He he was posing basically. He was posing. He was playing a part, and he was doing it very well to for the people who really wanted to lap it up. They were loving it. It was causing me a little bit of concern straight away. Anyway, there was a kind of a whole hoo-ha and a chanting and everything, and then I think he went up to his room, and then after a bit, he kind of wanted people out of the way, a lot of people. And I think it could have been just me and Vimuktasanga, but it could have been a bunch of older devotees, all of us together. It could have been, or there could have been two levels of this. But what it was when all the young people were out, his potential disciples and his godbrothers, like I said, it could have been just me and Vimuktasanga. He kind of laid down this thing. He says, well, this is the new way. This is how it's going to be. Um, I'm going to be planning my first initiations while I'm here, and I'm going to be here for a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, and I need to have new facilities. And he just started on this whole kind of way, introducing us to the kind of trying to explain to us what this role was now that now he'd taken sannyas, and now before he was just testing the ground, now he was officially going to play the role of guru, and this is the way that he was going to do it. So we were kind of like, okay. And so the first thing that he wanted to do was knock down the room that we'd already done and enlarge it, including the room where and Matunga had been staying, and Tribhuvan stayed for a while, but he left. And so we were going to have to move out of that room and go up to this other room above that room, because that was another room that was spare. And Bhagavan, we said, well, while we're doing this, we said there's this one other little room next to the brahmachari room. He says, I can handle that for some time while you do all that. He really wanted to get right into it. So there was immediately there was a plan, and I was just watching this, and because I was the kind of interior design person, I knew about we did it in consultation, but he made a point, he didn't want it. He said, I like what you did, it was all right, but it was a bit too hippie, he said. And I which I said, what do you mean hippie? And he said, the mirrored things on the wall. He didn't want that. He wanted it to be a very different type of vibe. And and I was like, okay, where are we going with all this? And so he kind of gave us, so I thought, okay, let's see. Let's just kind of go along with this. This is what the guy wants. This is what, So I did all my research. I think I went out with Vimuktasanga, went to look at wallpapers, we looked at lighting, we looked at carpeting, and I came back with things, showed him things, got his okay, and then the whole kind of process of transforming it happened with lots of brahmacharis and Kerio and other friends of the family, friends of the community. They came and they just went, it was a marathon. Get this thing done. And I think, new taps for the bathroom and all these different things. And then, chandelier. He wanted chandeliers. And I had some of my beautiful Indian prints. I think some of them I'd already done for the other room. I got them nicely framed. I was being very generous and offering them to Bhagavan for his room, mostly from the Banerjee series, because they look very beautiful, kind of watercolors and nice we got nice frames. And then there was this seat that I saw in a furniture shop, because we were thinking, what's his seat? Because he's got a seat that he's going to sit behind in his desk, and then there's going to be a seat for kind of also greeting guests, because he had this whole vision of himself being there, being the guru, that he now was the guru of the Hare Krishna movement for all purposes, according to him, there. And that's when it started to become apparent that basically he was now the guru of the zone that he had as a GBC. So that was curious. So then that was just kind of, okay, so then Bhavananda had his zone, Hansadutta would have his zone, Jayatirtha would have his zone, Kirtanananda would have his zone, Satswarup, Hridayananda, Jaipataka, I'm not sure I've missed out in that. But anyway, they've all got their different zones around the world. That's how it looks. That was the indication. It was all moving so fast about how to get it. Now, I went through a kind of curious little. I had to come, when I was writing about this, I had to go back into my mind and be quite honest about how I felt at the time while this was going on. And I remember I was kind of torn because one part of me was just really enjoying spending loads of money and doing something creative, and that was a challenge and great, quite fun. And also the idea of like, okay, you want the look, you want to have the thing. I'm like the designer. If you want to do it right, get the the over the top vulgar, imitation rococo seat if that's what you want, And but then the other part was suddenly, as we were going through the process, I noticed that really this was just fanning all of his ego, and I was just kind of like, compliant, in the whole process. So I was being torn like this, but it really came to a head. This is when it really started to go weird with me. Was while Bhagavan was in his little room, waiting while all this was going on, and the room was getting set up, his new room, and the arrangements were made coming for these initiations. He asked me to come into his room. I went up, and he was just by himself. And um, I used to lead the Guru Puja ceremony generally, and for some reason or other, it was the thing I led. And one of my services at this time was kind of cooking breakfast prasadam and leading the Guru Puja. This is the kind of deal I'd kind of done, my regular thing, and then I would do this kirtan, sometimes do street kirtan. That was the kind of what I was going to do now. And I'd led a couple of Guru Pujas leading up, while he was there at this time, leading up to this point. And it was, we had Prabhupada and we had the Arati, and then there was Bhagavan's Vyasasan, smaller, and he was on it, and I would sing the tune, and then somehow they would be doing their Arati, but it was all combined together, and I would end up with Prabhupada, Prabhupada, and they also developed these new titles for themselves. So Bhagavan became known as Guru Dev, or I forgot, Harikesh became Vishnupad, and they all got their different kind of titles. That immediately was a bit weird for me. So, okay, just to fill you up with kind of the scenario, I'd led these two Guru Pujas, but while he was being worshipped, but then there was, it was all directed really to Prabhupada because he is our Guru, isn't he? Mm. So we come into the room. I come into the room, and there's Bhagavan. And I could see he was a little bit, slightly nervous. He was a bit quite concerned. He said, "Hi, Matura." But he didn't say hi, Matura. He says, he kind of praised me. He said, very valuable devotee here in Amsterdam. So good that you're back, and I love you. When you do Guru Puja, everybody loves it. But I'm just wondering. I've got a request. If I wanted to put, and I was getting quite curious what this was about, and he could see he was kind of a bit nervous from his body language, and he said, "I was just wondering if during the Guru Puja you could chant my name as well, not for me, but for my disciples." And I'm listening to it, and I'm listening, and I'm going, okay. And he could see that I wasn't getting particularly enthusiastic about it. I was not rejecting the idea. I was just kind of mulling it over, not very enthusiastically at this moment at all. And so what happened was, for me, I tried this, doing what he wanted me to do. And I did it maybe twice. And when I tried to sing his name, for his, Guru Dev, Guru Dev, not for Prabhupada, but for his disciples, meaning him, that it wasn't doing it for me. And not only that, what was happening was he was giving talks, and now he was surrounded by all these young, enthusiastic new devotees who were looking at him as Guru, and all of the talks were Guru, Guru, Guru. And I was in the kitchen cooking breakfast prasadam after the Guru Pujas. And I started to stop doing the Guru Pujas and just went earlier. and I used to cook couscous and upma. I can't remember all the things I used to cook, but that's what I used to do. And but we used to have the walkie, the tape, the lecture would come through and come into the kitchen. And before, because we used to like hearing the live lectures, and then it was like an endurance test having to be in there because every lecture resolved around, it came round to surrender to the guru, surrender to the guru, 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 and I was going. It was just really, really indoctrination. Suddenly, it wasn't, there wasn't Prabhupada, it was no mention of really Prabhupada. The Guru meant them. It meant this is the new regime, and what it meant now to be a Krishna devotee means to surrender to these people, and specifically him at that time in that place. And it was not going down well with me at all. But then something happened after we kind of got the rooms left, and he was kind of like, he was established and he'd got his thing and he was feeling happy with it all. And I hadn't really shown, I wasn't really, being anti-authoritarian at all at this time. Bhagavan, when Vimuktasanga was in the room, he asked me one day, he said, why is it that you don't give more talks and lectures? He says, you're an older devotee, you're intelligent, I'm convinced that you can do. I came up with this. I said, look, Maharaj, there's certain devotees who I have to endure to listen to their talks, and I wouldn't want to put anybody through that. I said, do you know what my philosophy is? The cook should cook, the kirtanier should give kirtan, do the kirtan, and the people who can give the good talks should give the good talks, and everyone should do what they're good at. Everyone should do what they're good at. And I went on like that, and he smiled, because many devotees didn't. I thought about things. I had my own ideas about the way I thought things should be, and anyway, so that was my little thing. And then he looked at me and laughed, and he said, "You know what, though? I think you need to take on some responsibility for Krishna." And I was going to. That word put a bit of dread through me because I suppose I had a bit of a syndrome about growing up and being responsible. And he said, I want you to organise the Rathayatra here in Amsterdam. And I just, and he says, you need to know what it's like to be in anxiety for Krishna. He says, you're too laid back. Well, it may have been true. I'm not denying this in this incident because it was interesting. I was dealing with these two different energies. So one time he was, even though he had his authority, he was kind of respecting me and kind of and letting me know that he actually did think that I could pull this thing off. And he says you can, and and immediately it was discussed that I could probably have Vrishni Vamsa, a lovely devotee who have made friends with again on Facebook, and he was from Holland, knew everything about Amsterdam, and we got on really well. And he was like the assistant. I was in charge, but he did kind of really a lot of work of getting permits and doing things. And we went on a long journey with it all. Funnily enough, at this time, Hare Krishna Das had gone over to Jaya Theatre. This is what kind of happened with quite a few devotees during different regimes. If you didn't get on with people, lots of, like Paravida did it, Hare Krishnas, they kind of had a bit of problem maybe with Bhagavan, and they went over to England for a while. So Hare Krishnas had been over there. And he'd actually been, there was another very talented devotee called Havidas from South America. And they together collaborated with some other musicians and made an album called Night and Daydream. And their band was called Ananta. And it was they made a record that was going to be another fundraiser for all the ISKCON projects. And so they were in England. And I suddenly came up with, I started to develop a plan about what was the budget that we had for this festival. And gradually we developed a whole plan. And the whole plan was to bring Hare Krishnas and Havi and their band over, as well as the Bhaktivedanta Players. And then we were going to get this big marquee that was in Italy, and bring that to Vondel Park. And then they were also going to bring the Rathayatra cart from Italy because they had started to do them there and they had it all there. And it was a really complicated thing, but we had it all set up. And I have to admit, when it came to the actual day, and the days leading up to it, I've never, up until then, in all of my service, kind of peaked out on such a I really did transcend myself. I didn't really know who I was anymore. I was just this bundle of energy, because I knew I had all my assistants and people helping me, and we had people to cook the prasadam, people who were going to do the deities. Some other devotees were coming from here and there. The temple was full up with the devotees coming from Europe, and Bhumadev and Sakshi Gopal and the actors. And Radha Pilau, he remembers this because it was quite wonderful what happened on the drama on the stage. Um, there was one hiccup about getting the stage that happened. It was they forgot to, they got there too late at the night before, and so had to wait till the early morning to pick the stage from someplace. And so the delaying of setting up everything in the Vondel Park slowed everything a little bit down. But basically, it was a festival, Rathayatra cart through the town, and it was going to come into Vondel Park. There was this big stage. There was a massive place for prasadam that was all going to be cooked in the temple and then brought there, and I was responsible for all of it. And also at that time, I have to admit. During in that after during this time between when I'd come in Amsterdam and Bhagavan had been delegated me to do that, I'd started learning sitar, tabla, from a sitar player, Jamul Udin Bhartiya, who Ravi Shankar lists in his biography as his senior most disciple, and he'd set up a school of Indian music called the Tantri School of Music in Amsterdam, and I'd gone there and I'd been learning rudimentary tabla lessons, but I'm not going to go into the detail about that, but I've been really enjoying it. And I would go after cooking breakfast and walk through town, and I would be going to his to have lessons with him and to hear him play in the morning with this American guy, and I would accompany, and it was my bliss kind of sitting there in the morning with this incredible sitar player. And another story in the middle of all of this is that Kishori had re-emerged in Amsterdam. Surabi's ex-wife, the amazing, one of the most amazing cooks in the whole of ISKCON, very close with Prabhupada, and Gunamai, who'd been with Malati. They came there because a lot of people were confused now with this whole new energy after Prabhupada had gone. They didn't know where they stood in relationship with the institution. So Kishori set up a restaurant in Amsterdam, not far from the Bataanianstraat, and it was called Chez Kishori's. And her daughter Ramleela worked there in Gunamai, and they did it together. And it's most probably till this day some of the best prasadam I've ever eaten regularly. And you can guess, I like to eat, and I did start to put on weight. I was hardly eating in the temple anymore. I was just kind of doing this thing, and I was gradually. After being in India, I was used to having more freedom, and so for me, going to have the sitar, going there, and you can see this is a kind of. You can see where I'm going in my story. I'm getting a bit more lax in my strict brahmachari kind of behavior that had been going on all this time. And you can see my kind of path to more freedom and independence is coming about. And through going to that to that restaurant, I got very close with Kishori, and as she told me the whole story of her life, which was fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I won't go in there, but it was the story that led to Hare Krishna Das, Surabi, and Jagadev all becoming devotees. It started with Kishori, and she's a wonderful lady. So that was going on in the brew, the temple, tabla, Kishori, and there I am in Amsterdam, kind of getting to organise the Rathayatra, basically. So, it's a big, there's a lot going on, and now we'd decided. I didn't really realise what was going on, but because it was Holland and Surabi was going to be around and Hare Krishnas was coming, and he was Dutch, Surabi was going to become the guest speaker at the festival. And this became a little bit of a subtle snub to Bhagavan, really. And it was almost slightly deliberate in a sense as well, because we just didn't want him, the whole festival, to be about him. It was about Jagannath and the devotees, you know, and I think that he held this as at the time as a little bit of a resentment. And the fact that Hare Krishna had left his zone and gone over to Europe and now was coming over there, all these things were kind of like, even though it asked me to put on the festival, I was doing it my way, and this is the way it turned out. And it was brilliant. Everything went amazingly. There was one part where I had to rush back to the temple and get the pots and pans, and there was just me and Asararu, and we had to take these milk churns filled back with lassi, strawberry lassi, downstairs, and we had this adrenaline superhuman strength where we just carried these pots and threw them in, and I just remember it just kind of because everything had to get to the park, and it was quite away from Heringrat to Vondel Park, and we were driving through, and there was a couple of devotees just staying in the temple to make sure everything was safe and everything, but everything was happening down at the park. And after a long time, Mohan, poor bless him, he had all this very complex stuff that he had to put together. You know, putting microphones on a drum, a bass, and this and that takes a lot of time, especially if you haven't maybe practiced it a lot before. And so there was a bit of a delay in the group coming, but then they played, and it kind of divided a bit of the audience. I talked to a few people. Some people thought that they weren't expecting kind of Western pop music at a Krishna festival, and sometimes I used to think, oh, maybe I should have just got Jamul Udin Bhartiya and had a sitar and some Indian dance. But that's what we had. Quite a lot of people liked it, and funnily enough, at that time there was an amphitheatre in the other side of the park, and there was quite a lot of people in the park had gone to that reggae concert. We couldn't really hear it from where we were, so that was happening in the park as well. And Simon Vinkenode, Jagadev had invited him. He was like the Timothy Leary of Holland or the Allen Ginsberg. He was there enjoying it. There were some cool people. It was a big event. We'd had Rathayatras before, but this was the biggest one that we'd had up to then. And then it came in and then what happened was amazing. Just when it came time, I think, for the prasadam to be distributed to everybody, the reggae concert finished, and suddenly all these people appeared from nowhere, and they were like, "Wow, there's a whole other thing going on here, and free food!" And so it was great. We suddenly had enough food to feed everybody, all these hundreds and hundreds of people that were there in the park that day, and it was a glorious summer day. And then the Bhaktivedanta Players came on stage to do the Ramayana, the story of Ramayana. And there was this classic bit where because we'd been a bit delayed in the whole kind of program, we were running behind the schedule, and the park, around the park, there are houses and where people dwell, and so there's certain strictures about timing of how long, volume and stuff. That's part of the permit for the park, and we were crossing the boundaries with time, and there was police kind of waiting on the side, and there was the famous scene on the stage when Ravana is shot, and the police walked on stage and they kind of arrested grabbed Ravana, and the audience was just loving it. It was like some kind of pantomime, and he went, "I haven't got," you know. He mentioned that on Facebook once. We reconnected. It was great fun, and then the drama finished, and you know, all's wells that end well. So that was a big event. Okay, in this year, lots of things you can see are happening in my life and in the Krishna movement at this time. Then during this, just after this, the summer finished. Some devotees appeared in Amsterdam who were on a party that had come from India, and they were there to collect funds and organised 4 vehicles to drive overland to the Indian subcontinent. One was for Bangladesh, 2 for India, and 1 for Nepal, and it was led by Prabhavishnu Swami from Ireland originally, and he was connected very much with Jayapataka, who was the kind of the GBC of Mayapur, and included Nepal and a few other places at that time. And so he was his kind of assistant, and a couple of people connected devotees came. There was Dhruvanath, there was Gora Hari, who had joined in England, in India, who was from Jersey. There was Pitamba, who was from Hamburg, and Ravi, who was kind of worked very closely with Prabhavishnu, and he was very practical with cars and spent quite a lot of time in India, and who I'd actually seen in India, and we'd actually kind of talked. He would been traveling with Lokanath Maharaj quite a bit in India. Now, what had happened was that in all this reshuffling of the rooms for Bhagavan, I'd moved upstairs into this room, and me and my friend Matanga had taken it over as our kind of like haven. And he got this nickname, the Krishna Katar Room. And because Bhagavan had got rid of that seat that we'd bought him before, I brought up this seat. I had all my posters collection, hundreds from India, and I put them all over my wall. And I put a little. We had some little decorative thing. I put that up on the ceiling, and we had a sound system. In fact, we had a groovy little pad. And to get to our room, you had to actually come right up to the top where the bathing area was, go down a kind of weird corridor at the top, and come to this. It was quite away from everything, and that's just the way we wanted it, considering what was happening in the temple now. It was really all of these. ISKCON was becoming a movement, really, for creating a new devotees to become disciples of the new gurus. And us God brothers were all meant to be there to support this new plan and this program. And we were all kind of like, And I was most probably, in my mind, one of the most kind of really doubting the whole thing. And during this time, Vimuktasanga, my dear friend who was the president, was kind of in the middle of all of this. Really, because he was also very Bhagavan trusted him immensely, and for years he did, and so in from which Sang was a friend of Bhagavan, a friend of mine. He was the temple president, and occasionally he would just kind of leave all his management things to come up to our pad just to chill out with the lads, really. And also it became a place where any Prabhupada disciples that were passing through, they wouldn't necessarily stay in our room, but they would come out and hang out. It was our hangout place where you could talk about stuff uncensored, because walls have ears in communities, and there were certain things that you didn't want to say in front of new devotees. It was already the situation was developing like this. But as far as I know, most probably, at least in Europe, maybe in the whole world, we were one of the only kind of brahmacharis that had a kind of a scene like this. And I was beginning to. I met somebody through my sitar, the guy teaching me tablas. One of his students worked for a Boudemont, a very famous shop in Amsterdam that sold mystical New Age books as well as music, and he was a student of Jamul Udin Bhartiya and sitar, a really nice guy, and he had a massive private collection. And he said, you can borrow them all if you want to make recordings. I said, I want to. So that's kind of where I kind of carried on making my copies and my built up my collection from listening. You had all these amazing records, and we had a record player, we had a record, we had tapes. Matanga was quite good with these things as well, and but we followed all. We got up every morning, we went to the Mongol Arctic, and Matanga, I think, was getting involved with the Sankirtan at that time. Matanga was, quite shortly, I'm not sure when, he was going to end up marrying a Veda Smriti, who'd been there for quite a while, who was of Turkish origins but had lived in Holland for quite a while. And so that's what was happening. And while these devotees who were traveling, Ravi was the first one. He came up to my room because we knew each other and we were talking. And funnily enough, my friend Chanarari, who after that Mayapur festival, I come to Amsterdam, he'd gone on a whole journey and ended up in Bangladesh. I'd never really knew much about Bangladesh at that time. I didn't really realize it was East Bengal and what was going on. I was not that aware. And then suddenly I found out that he was there and having a great time. And then Ravi said to me, because he could see I was really into music and kirtan and classical Indian music, ragas, and he said these two magic words. He said, have you ever heard of Raga Kirtan? I went, Raga Kirtan? What's that? He says, that's what they do in Bangladesh. And I said, really? And then he described it, kind of what it was. And instantly, it was a little bit like me in London when I got the crumpled bit of paper that said, go to Amsterdam. I immediately knew I was meant to go off to Amsterdam. Suddenly I was like, I've got to know more about this Raga Kirtan. That's what I'm looking for, really. Raga Kirtan sounds like a great combination, you know. And so, and then some other devotees came and visited, Abhinandan and Peter Das, and they were still connected with the library party with Tamala Krishna. And because he had heard about this whole thing with the coral, he'd sent them on a mission to get some of this coral, and they were on their way through Holland, on their way to America, for some of this coral. And we were all up, and it just so happened to coincide, and we're getting to kind of winter now, with Bhagavan's next visit to Amsterdam. And his room was right underneath. So there you go, just creating the setting. This kind of what had been going on in these few months. I don't think he'd been there for quite a while, really. He'd been doing all the other zone, especially not since the summer. There was this little thing I could tell, this little bit of resentment still going on, you know, because of him not being the big one at the festival, at the Rathayatra festival. So one inside of our room was this long entrance I told you, but there was another side entrance which was steps that led down to Bhagavan's room below. So I think maybe only he'd been there for the first day, and we were upstairs. You know, there was this kind of gang of us. You know, and I was playing Ravi Shankar and Indian music in the background, and where we were talking, and that music was going down. And he sent one of his assistants, a French chap, can't remember his name, up to say, can you, Bhagavan says, do you think you can turn the music down? And and I said something, and I think we kind of, I, it was either once or twice. He did it once, told us, and then we carried on. Okay, and then he came up. He says, "Bhagavan says you have to turn the music noise down." And I said something like, "Who's Bhagavan?" Or Guru Dev. He said, "Guru Dev said to turn it down," and I said, "He's not my Guru Dev." And I let it out. You know, and all the other devotees kind of looked at me, and it's Ravi Shankar, and I was a belligerent kind of. I was getting, you know, I was being challenged. This is me with authorities, and again, and he went down, and we didn't really hear anything. Then a bit later, somebody came up with one of these messages. Bhagavan wants to see all of you out at so and so time later on. Everybody here in the room. And everyone's like, "Oh God, Mathura's got us all on it. We're all in this kind of. We're all going to get chastised for whatever." And so what happened was we all got called down into Bhagavan's room, and now this is where he made his fatal mistake. Uh, Anyway, I'll tell you, it does get reconciled later on in the story, but at this moment, we were coming into his room that was quite chock-a-block with his young disciples all there, and there was Bhagavan sitting very sternly, giving off extremely authoritarian vibes from behind the desk, looking at us all. We all kind of came in sheepishly. I sat near the front because all the other devotees were kind of like visiting, and it was they're all hanging out in my room, I think, except for Matanga. And so we were sitting there, and Bhagavan started to say. He actually started with everybody else. He started with okay, what are you doing here, Peter? Why are you doing this? We're doing this thing because of Tamala. He says, I don't. To come into my zone, you have to have my authority, Tamal or no authority. You, Krishna Goswami, and he said, and then he asked to Peter, to the others, and they all kind of said, we're with the Prabhavishnu's library party, we're just collecting funds, and how long are you all going to be here for? Not long. We're all, we're planning to go. Well, I hope that you get there soon, because no, Prabhavishnu hasn't really talked to me officially about you collecting in my zone. And they go, yes, Maharaj. They're all just very, and then he saved me for last. And so he paused, and then he looked at me. I could, and he goes, and there's all these people in the room, all these other devotees. So Mathura. And then he made some joke about me going to Kishori's restaurant and the fact that I was kind of getting fat and maybe getting pimples. He was trying to kind of fun at and ridicule me and make fun of me and demean me a little bit. And I was kind of, ha ha ha, ha, very kind of, And then he kind of stopped that, and then he went into serious mode. And then he said, what, he just started on some ridiculous bullshit trip, and he started to say, Srila Prabhupada said that Ravi Shankar is a demon. And I said, and he said a couple of things, and I said, but actually, what it is I'm listening to Indian music, and classical ragas are part of Indian culture, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And he butted in and said something more, and then I stopped and I said, but, and went on the second or third but, when I kind of interrupted him and, to justify what I was doing, he said, don't but me! And the whole room totally froze. I mean, first of all, I'd never seen Bhagavan like that with me, ever. Most of the devotees had never seen. I was a kind of a nice, friendly devotee, and they'd never seen me being chastised in public, and they'd never seen Bhagavan be getting angry. And I think it shocked quite a lot of people, and I think it shocked me and my other friends as well. Anyway, in it, he said, I'd actually said, well, look, he says, what do I said, look, actually, you know what, Maharaj, I'm planning to go with the boys overland to India, and to with Prabhavishnu's, and he goes, and he like, great, when are you going? And I said, well, we're planning to go. And then he says, well, and I said, well, I've just got to collect a bit of money, and the things. He says, how much money do you need? And then he looked at Vimuktasanga sitting in the corner, quite embarrassed, because I'm his friend, and he's been put, and he was going, how much money do you need? A few $100? Vimuktasanga, have you got the money? Kind of give it to him, kind of like that. And it was. I can't remember if he actually gave the money then or it was later, but that was the mood. And then after we kind of went out of the room, and I think most probably what had happened was this was after these initiations that he'd done there. So this was really, really was. He initiated quite a few people. He was really asserting his power at this time, and. That was it, really. My kind of fate had been sealed in this meeting. Suddenly there it was, the decision had been made. I was now leaving, and I was going to go overland to India, or most probably Bangladesh, to find out about Raga Kirtans, and I was going to leave this scenario that I was in. And then that's what I'm going to carry on with in the next share, to tell you what happened. I went on this amazing adventure during the Iranian Revolution overland, and arrived in villages in Bangladesh, the most pristine place in the world where the tradition of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is practiced. And so I went from this to that, and that's going to be the next part of my story. So thank you very much for allowing me to share you that part of that story, because it was a very, very challenging experience for me. And it seems that this is the kind of a story through my life with authority figures. I just kind of, when I'm pushed to the wall, I'm okay, I'll play a game, okay, authority, I'm an assistant run by authorities, I can do that, but don't push me to this point, because then I react. This is how I become, and my kind of like my individual nature comes out. No one's going to tread all over me. And anyway, this is what's going to happen in the next part of the story. So I hope everyone out there in the world, even though you all seem very, very close with these shares, is not getting too stressed out. I mean, it does change every day, doesn't it? All sorts of things can happen from day to day that can affect one's mood. And somebody told me that the latest thing is that we're all going to be in lockdown till July. I haven't even checked all that. I have no idea where that's all going. At the moment, for me, specifically where I am, I'm feeling really good. And quite a few friends of mine, this is a great time. This is actually a great time. They're getting, they're catching up on things that they haven't done. They're not missing it, but everyone's in different situations. And for some people, it's very, very frustrating not being able to move and get about. And specifically for the small businesses, the self-employed people, this is where I think the real kind of, it's getting quite heavy now with all this lockdown and stuff. And I wish all the best for everybody, and I hope everyone doesn't suffer too much during this kind of turmoil and tries to keep in their own power, spiritual power, and not get too kind of confused, anxiety and fear. Let your energy go down. Okay. Lots of love, big hugs to you all. Hari Om.